Welcome back to the Storypunks podcast, the show where we talk about all the punks, so steampunk, dieselpunk, cyberpunk, and all the other punks. So this is part 2 of 2. We started this conversation in episode 57. This is episode 58, and today, as you know, if you've joined us from episode 57, we're talking about Decopunk and Dieselpunk, and I'm so excited to jump into more of Todd's work, his series Airship Daedalus, and so much more. I'm really thrilled to talk about some of the different hats he wears as a creator and so much more. So there's tons to glean from him in part 2. And since we are talking about the 1920s, 1930s, if you recall, I do have an upcoming series called the Saltine Paradox, which I began releasing last year with my first book. The one I was talking about when I talked about Bolivia and some of my travels there and some of the different things I was creating for a Decopunk world that also had to do with the salt flats and time travel. And all of that is still rolling out, but it'll come in 2020. And I've been working on some different strategic relationships to just try to, get somewhere with these series I'm working on. I'm sure many of you relate. And it's always just kind of a meandering path when you're trying to do things for the first time. So that's coming out next year, though. You can join the Patreon beta reading group now. It's the same beta reading group. So that way you will get announcements and different things related to that as it rolls out, because some of that may happen before the next season starts. And so if you're interested in being involved with the Saltine Paradox series, then please do go to patreon.com/storypunks. I would love to get your input. And other than that, I think we need to jump right back in with part 2. Here is the conclusion of my conversation with Todd Downing. I do want to still talk about the Airship Daedalus a little bit, because I'm sure there was tons of research. I know it's very subjective, project to project, but can you tell us a little bit about creating the Airship Daedalus? And it'll just give people a feel for what's in that storyline and everything.
Yeah. When I was in college, and I'm dating myself here in the late 80s, I kind of got this fascination with the 1920s out of nowhere. It just kind of hit me. And I had always kind of liked vintage stuff, 30s and 40s and, World War II, just from my grandfather's influence and big band music, swing music, and that kind of thing. But then I started to dig back a little bit more in history, and I found I really resonated with the 1920s as a period. And I started to write some short adventure stories set in that period with characters that would become the main characters of Jack and Doc in Airship Daedalus. Then in about, I backburnered this for quite a while, working on some other stuff, Squeaky Octopus. Then in about 2010, I linked up with Brian Beardsley, who really mimics a lot of the old Alex Raymond stuff, the Flash Gordon stuff from the 30s. And we launched Airship Daedalus as a webcomic. And that went for a couple of years. We had 4 chapters done, and then we compiled them, first 3 in a trade paperback.
Perfect.
And then that was parlayed into the radio show. And we have 12 episodes of Airship Daedalus and Aegis Tales, which is kind of the offshoot. Go get Pinktopus.
It's worth it just for that name of that toy.
Pinktopus. Okay, and then the radio shows and the comic were parlayed into the role-playing line, which has about half a dozen different supplements to it. And then later on, I got in touch with a friend of mine, John Sullivan, who had written some stuff for my publishing company on the game side, tabletop game side, a while back, and said, "What would you feel about doing a long form novel in the Daedalus setting?" And he was totally down with that. And in fact, he was about to launch his career in long form fiction under a couple of different pseudonyms. And he writes really amazing contemporary spy fiction, action adventure stuff.
Cool.
And it's just amazing. And so under a different pseudonym, he wrote Assassins of the Lost Kingdom. So E.J. Blaine is that pseudonym. He also writes under Mark Para. That's what he does, is spy fiction. And so as I was working with him on publishing that novel, we produced that first. And then I went, well, it really needs a prequel. It needs the novelization of the comics and the radio shows that kind of set the stage for what happens later. So I authored A Shield Against the Darkness as kind of a prequel.
Okay.
Well, Amazon doesn't allow book number 0 in their numbering order when it comes to box sets. So I had to go back and renumber. This is number 1. And now Assassins of the Lost Kingdom is number 2.
Okay, just because I'm going to run into this was a total selfish question, but
Yes.
Can you do a 0.5 number? Did you try that?
I didn't try 0.5. I looked into a lot of the message boards and stuff like that. Were saying that it's got to be a whole integer. So
yeah. Dang it.
Yeah. And so I was so kind of juiced by finishing. A Shield Against the Darkness was the first novel I had finished since about 1995. Like really early on, I started writing novels, and I was going the traditional route because there was no e-publishing at the time in the early 90s. And actually got a sci-fi novel optioned by Time Warner Books. So glad it wasn't published, but it was just kind of, family came along, and the video game industry came along for 10 years. And so I just kind of rolled with it.
But that's still encouraging and cool.
Well, yeah. But I knew now I'm at a much more mature place in my life, and a better writer to begin with. And so I started to kind of get back into the long form fiction. And pretty soon I had book number 3, The Golden City. If people have checked out the radio show, there one of the Aegis Tales, there's a 4-part Aegis Tales story called The Golden City, which is kind of a slimmed down version of this. And then this just dropped on my birthday this year, book 4,
Woo-hoo!
Legend of the Savage Isle. And yes, I do my own book covers.
So cool. Why does that not surprise me, Todd?
It's a control thing. I gotta have control over it.
I agree with you. I'm doing the same thing on not the same scope of everything, but I do my own book covers, and I completely get it.
They're great, by the way. I have checked them out. They're great.
Well, I don't do the art. Do you do the art from like stage 1? Because I don't do that. I cannot claim that.
Yes.
That is awesome.
I do a lot of 3D modeling work, and so I'll do 3D renders, and I work with a friend down in San Diego who's a much better modeler, and he has done my airship model like this. The Daedalus here in the foreground is a 3D model that's rendered out, and then I digitally paint over it. So
okay.
And then there is a supplement to the whole Airship Daedalus line, and that's the Aegis Tales Pulp anthology. And that's 8 different authors. These are all friends of mine from different disciplines, and what brings them together is that they're all authors, and they're all fantastic. And I have 2 stories in here, and they are stories that take place in the same setting, but with different characters.
Okay,
so
cool.
Kind of a extended universe.
Got it. And is it the Dieselpunk era or Deco punk era as well?
Oh yeah. In the main storyline, I started in 1925 with the comic and how they all get together, and every novel tends to be the next year in sequence.
Okay, so, cool.
With the exception of Golden City and Savage Isle, both take place in 1927 because the missions are kind of combined into a single time period. But usually it starts out, here we are living our lives and Aegis calls upon us to save the world.
Got it. So, Todd, do you ever totally dress up like the 1920s, 1930s? Because you have this passion for it.
I haven't done a whole lot of cosplay as such. I used to get into Halloween quite a bit. I used to custom write murder mystery Halloween parties and stuff from my friends. But I haven't done a lot of convention cosplay, mostly because I usually, when I'm at a convention, I'm there, as a professional trying to, pimp my stuff.
Yeah. I'm always just curious. I'm not a huge cosplayer either, but whenever I try to branch out, I always think, should I dress up like my characters, or is that too on the nose?
Right. I do have an amazing pirate getup, but yeah, that has nothing to do with. The thing is, with my current age and body type, is not really the 1920s square-jawed pulp hero kind of look. So.
Totally understandable.
I really need to hit the gym a lot more.
Well, I completely commiserate. And unless we've already covered it, what would you say to creators when it comes to pet peeves that you run into? You've given us this amazing window into your world that you've created, and I'm sure you have a ton of insight from enjoying other stuff in this time period or beyond.
Yeah, actually. So I think that all kind of, I hesitate to say alt history because that's not the entire premise of it. There are some alt history aspects to what I do because the Airship Daedalus, the Aegis verse, is kind of predicated on a couple of historical changes, post-Civil War, federal troops enforced restoration, and so the unity governments were allowed to take hold, and voting rights were militarily enforced in the post-war South. So you don't have a Jim Crow South like we did in our own timeline. I did that very specifically to be able to write, to paint with more colors, to paint with a fuller palette, and include underrepresented characters, ethnicities, women, African American, Native American, and of course my cast is international. But I wanted to get better representation in a genre that traditionally has been very casually racist and sexist. You can read a lot of vintage pulp, and you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt because their standards were not the same as ours. But I wanted to maintain all the fun and adventure of pulp, but just give it some better representation. And so we have that kind of diversion in the timeline, as well as the U.S. government always kept its treaties with the Native Americans. And so there's kind of more assimilation, and there was no Trail of Tears and, that kind of thing. It's just more of an inclusive melting pot, I guess, for lack of a better term. With those conceits, I had to keep rolling forward, even including things like prohibition, because I needed those constraints for plot elements. I'm not looking to radically change the history and the timeline. I'm just kind of making subtle tweaks here and there. So basically, I think a peeve of mine is I've seen a lot of like hot takes on historical figures from a contemporary morality. And while I've changed the environment of my material to better include marginalized groups, I'm not trying to be edgy, retconning historical figures like, Thomas Edison is a huge patron of the Ages organization. In recent years, we've seen a lot of Edison bashing online. And it's actually kind of insulting that, not necessarily to Edison, he's dead, he doesn't care, but from a historical standpoint, as somebody who really likes history and enjoys history and soaks it up, it's a really one-sided look at a very complicated individual, which everybody was and everybody is. So I guess the hot takes, not so great. I would like to see a little bit more nuance. It's kind of funny, here I am preaching about nuance when I write Pulp, which is very black and white. It's very good guys are good, bad guys are evil, mustache twisting evil, with the emphasis on the eel. And but yet I always try and get nuance and gradient into the characters themselves, especially the good guys. I mean, the bad guys, I don't care so much if they're not. I mean, even my bad guys are gradient. I understand, but it's just, yeah, I would like to see more nuance.
Thank you for sharing that.
I kind of went off on a...
No, that's so great to keep getting everyone's take on all those things. And I think that spectrum is where a lot of the artistry can come in and play with that stuff. So
for sure. Yeah. You have another guest, by the way.
Wait. Oh my goodness.
Hi, sweetie.
It's like I'm just watching the camera zoom in on those beautiful blue eyes. They're amazing.
She is pretty amazing. She loves people. She came to us from a kill shelter in Texas, where her family surrendered her because she was chasing their chickens. So, as a husky Labrador mix, she's got a high prey drive, and she's going to chase chickens. We have chickens, but they're in an enclosed run. They don't free range because we live in woods and wetlands. We've got lots of predators out here. So, she coexists, and we're working on training and getting her socialized with dogs. We get the feeling she was mostly an outdoor dog and never was around others.
Yeah.
So she loves people, not so much with the other dogs, and we're working on that.
Oh, that's so cool. Well, I do have one last question. I know we've been talking for a little while, but when it comes to Dieselpunk and all the stuff that you created, is there anything that these genres have taught you, and or that you would like to see from them in the future, or that you hope they will add to the world or benefit the world?
Sure. So I've always been a huge Pulp fan growing up, even before I knew what the term was. I was listening to old Shadow episodes because they used to, in the 70s and 80s, they would put out LPs or cassettes of the old 1930s radio shows. So I was big into those. I would just eat those up. And then comics, of course, that's a direct descendant of the whole Pulp movement. And then in the early 80s, you started to have kind of this resurgence, and throughout the 80s, because you had the whole Indiana Jones thing and the Rocketeer. And in fact, those are the two things that my stuff has been likened to, which I constantly harp on that in my marketing, is Indiana Jones meets the Rocketeer. That was just the best quote I could ever have gotten. And those things, I think, convey a very positive outlook, especially for us as Americans. Like, we have this sense that we've always been indoctrinated into our exceptionalism in the world. And right now, that's kind of a problematic outlook because we're not living up to it. I think characters like Indiana Jones, like the Rocketeer, like, Captain America, and that kind of thing can point us in a very positive way, where we're not leading through being the bully. We're leading through goodness and by example. And that's something that the message of Pulp is very, I think, relevant today, is that we should be living in a world where, everybody agrees Nazis are bad. That's not the world we're living in right now, and it really should be. So, yeah, that's what I would like to see, a little, some more of that, people kind of living up to the ideals that we've been told we actually embody.
It's very interesting to me to think about how Decopunk and Dieselpunk can grow well beyond the US centric situation that we often get in the literature.
I was hoping you might touch on this.
Yeah.
I have always believed that we are more similar than we are different. By taking a very international approach to this kind of post-World War I setting, and really questioning the whole concept of empire, I think it is only going to lead toward positive change.
I feel like
Freya's
sorry about the
big octopus.
That's like her hallelujah, or her yeah, I agree.
Okay, we'll pretend it's that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Pulp and Pulp Adventure should be. I don't have a problem with American characters being, leading the charge kind of thing, because that's who I am. I don't know if I would consider myself a patriot. I'm very pragmatic, and I think we should live. I think respect is earned, and I think we need to earn respect in the world, and not demand it. But that's what my characters do. My characters are in a position where they can be in all kinds of different places in the world at that time, and a lot of places were really problematic. A lot of places were underdeveloped and violent, and we're still kind of reeling from the World War I, from the Great War. And so there's a lot of political upheaval, a lot of social upheaval, and they're in a position where they can observe this and go, hey, you know what? This is not right. Let's do something about that. And in fact, in Legend of the Savage Isle, one of the first things they do is they intercede in a tribal rebellion in Kenya, where the British garrison is going out and slaughtering Kikuyu in their villages as a reprisal for a killing. And the crew actually gets down there and intercedes physically with, getting the Brits to stand down. And
your story goes to other continents, and
it's literally globe trotting. It's when you have an experimental airship, that why not? The sky's the limit, literally.
It is, yeah. Well, thank you so much. This has been so fun to talk about this era.
Welcome. Thank you, Cindy.
Yes, absolutely. And just for anyone listening, I do have some links for some promotional copies of Todd's work. So please join the insider communities either through my newsletter or my Patreon page for Storypunks. And thank you, Todd, for extending that, those freebies for some of
Absolutely. No, these are the audiobooks, I think is what you're talking about. The first two Daedalus novels now have audiobooks on Audible, and I've furnished some free codes.
Yes, absolutely. And Todd, thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Cindy.
To staying in touch.
Oh, excellent.
And there you go. Some Dieselpunk, Decopunk awesomeness. Thank you to Todd Downing for such a wonderful conversation and very inspiring for everything I'm working on. Hopefully you as well. And Todd is also very gracious. He gifted me some freebies of his stories that we've been talking about today. I gave those to my Patreon beta readers or followers. There were a limited number. If you are interested in being part of that insider group for giveaways and different things that my guests provide, then please go to patreon.com, patreon.com/Storypunks. So yeah, and to me, that's one of the beauties of Patreon, that creators get, patronage, they get support and the ability to start growing everything that they're working on. But also the patrons tend to get a lot given back to them, often in excess of what they are donating. And especially thanks to the many artists I partner with or plan to partner with, like Todd Downing. And I really appreciate him offering that to my audience. I do hope that you will forgive me mentioning Patreon so many times. It's mostly because I just launched it, but also that's what's going to bridge season 2 to season 3. And fingers crossed, we may even start season 3 early if we can reach that first milestone. So that's what I'm pushing toward, and I wish you the best of luck with anything you're looking forward to or any goals you are pursuing, or hopefully seeing the end in sight. And I know that I really appreciate your help with everything I'm working on. I really do feel it, and I'm sending it back your way. I hope you have a wonderful and creative week.